Hello, everyone. This is Alexandria, also known as Ozma in the Dark. We're having a special pre-recorded episode, so don't expect us to ever respond to anything being texted out, and there are no call-ins this episode. Just mentioning that beforehand. Now that you guys have left, let me introduce the co-hosts. Along with our guest. And I go by she, they pronouns. To my left, at least on my screen, she is Christy Abbey. How are you doing, Christy?
I'm doing very well. I'm very busy, but I'm very happy with it. So,
and since we are keeping to the pronoun thing,
shit! I'm the one who brought it up.
You started it.
Yeah, I know. She, her. Oh my goodness.
It's fine. We're podcasts. We're supposed to mess up randomly. It's a
banter.
Rule.
Lots of banter.
How are you doing? Perfect.
Doing pretty good, and him.
Okay,
and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah. Me too.
Same.
Somehow we ended up with a good topic. And how are you doing, Zahn Zee?
I'm doing very well. I'm having a really nice day today so far, and it's gotten even better now that I get to chat to yourselves. I'm Zahn Zee. I go by he, him pronouns. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Oh. Too.
And today we are talking about the fun topic combination of gender and identity. So I realize that's a lot to talk about, but at the same time there are some connections to them. If any of you guys have can mention your general thoughts on the topic, that would be lovely. Any one of you is free to do that.
Well, what we're generally doing, for instance, I'm Hispanic, I'm intersex, redhead, which is actually rarer than trans people. I'm considered trans woman, which I am. I consider it too. So basically, what you're having is what you're actually saying is intersectionality. Let's see. I live in Buffalo, which is its own thing, and that's a U.S. thing. So, so nationality is an identity. All of that thing. That's pretty much it. That's my thoughts on it are intersectionality is way misunderstood and very useful in gaining rights in individual groups.
What about you, Perfict or Zahn Zee?
Well, I'm looking in. I want to talk about things like the ship of Theseus and that proposition of identity, and when does a trans person feel that they have a dead name? When do they feel that there is a enough discontinuity of identity that they want to launch it as a new identity, a new ship?
Oh, I love this topic. I love that topic better. We'll go with that. Or that version of the topic better.
No, I mean, like, there's just a lot of stuff to talk about. It's okay. We can do, like, the nice thing about this is we can do this over and over, this general aspect of the topic, because there's more than a podcast's worth, honestly.
Yes.
Because like it's one, I just have to really appreciate what Perfict said there, because I'm a philosophy nerd myself. I'm going back to university to study philosophy, so the ship of Theseus is just such an interesting way of kind of like having the outer frame of this conversation. I've deliberately put it that way, while also recognizing what Christy is saying, with that there's all of the different kind of like the intersecting points of identity attached to all these different things. Where like I'm cis male, white, Irish, where that within those 4 words is a lifetime's worth of attachments to it, and it's understanding the intersection of all of those different things and how they determine your identity. Because one thing that's important to understand as well is like that we're individuals as much as we are members of societies, so our identities we can share amongst each other, and understanding all of those different interactions can help bring us together and not to use them to sow division amongst each other. So it's a beautiful and powerful concept.
Yes.
Yes. That was gorgeously said.
That was actually really well said. There's a reason. I knew there was a reason I asked you.
I have to. In that case, I just have to get my joking nature out of the way right away.
Okay.
So if you have if the ship of Theseus is running into 5 people, if you don't throw a lever, but it is running into I don't know. It's so different now, but it's still the same. I can actually say one of the my Christopher turned into a dead name fairly quickly. I mean, once I was out, the person I always felt like was there, and a lot of anger, a lot of other things disappeared just right then, just upon saying the words, you know.
Okay, but I don't imagine that's a uniform experience.
No.
That is correct, because I have a different experience. What you have trans women on the shows with different experiences? No, it was just Daniel became like it was very gradual, and like I don't fully consider parts of it. I don't fully consider aspects of my life lost or not something I did. It's like a weird half connection where it's just like, yeah, I can kind of see that stuff. I kind of get it, but it's still like so dead because it doesn't really make sense to call me that anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know when it stopped. It like completely stopped making sense, but it did at some point.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the point of the ship of Theseus is there isn't any given point. You can't say it's at this moment, but you can say it did happen in there somewhere.
I mean, yeah, no, the ship of Theseus is definitely what happened to me with Dame and a lot of transitioning stuff. But figuring myself out. I don't know.
I have a friend who I talk about once in a while who transitioned in the early 2000s, and one of the things she says is that a lot of memories will be recontextualized, and when there is a completeness to recontextualizing memory as a trans person, and I think I've hit that point. But something that she said early on, and she said she knew a friend of mine who was in the same fraternity, and my immediate question was, oh, it was a co-ed fraternity? Because I don't think of her as anything but that. And she said, because I was in it, yeah, it feels like that, and I have a hard time not seeing myself as a woman in that situation. That would be the ship of Theseus problem, and really is a thing we talk about in trans circles all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it pops up weekly or every other week on trans Twitter.
Oh yeah.
Although honestly, I usually end up paying attention to other stuff.
Okay.
But yeah, so in terms of gender an interesting topic in terms of the level of importance it's given. And like on the one hand, I feel like it's important in terms of identifying myself, but on the other hand, I feel like there isn't any real purpose to it. So I get really I'm not quite sure what to do, because like I guess I don't really see the use outside of the fact that it's in society, but at the same time I have an emotional connection to it, so it's like
that's a really hard one.
It's partly a self-perpetuating cycle that we put ourselves through, and having had children, you will see when you have your children out in public that people will go, oh, it's so cute, and they will actually withdraw, pull back, and say, is it a boy or a girl? Because they want to know how to interact with it.
Yeah.
And that people seem to need to know that. And one of the things that does is it impresses on kids a need to identify that way. And then they grow up to be adults that need to know that. In order to interact with anything, they need to know its gender.
Yeah, that is one thing. And
I mean, we're taking steps towards breaking that little cycle where it stops becoming an imperative part of everyday life.
Well, here's the question, because I'm Hispanic, I find that as a very strong thing I identify with as well, and it's one of those as Zahn Zee said, lifetime of things that go inside of it. I remember seeing I think his name was Victor Bueno, the comedy piano player.
Victor Borgia?
Victor Borgia, thank you. I knew someone old like me would know it. Victor Borgia, and talking about how he learned English, which was from watching soap operas, and then one day he started thinking in English, and it was like a surprise to him, because so much of his identity was wrapped up in his immigrant status, and he felt like an American at that point. And that's one of the I mean, that's another identity for that just hit, and it was a ship of Theseus, but he just didn't see it coming. He didn't see when that final board was nailed in, if you will.
It was a sea change.
Oh God! Why didn't I think of that one? Dear.
We've got a nautical theme going here.
Apparently.
And I'm stuck between Scylla and Cerberus. So the question was, what are the important, when you mentioned these are different identities, that what hits strongest? I mean, is being a cis man just when you're within something that comes to mind when you're within trans spaces, or is it something that, you know, every so once in a while you go, oh, I'm a cis guy?
In a way, yes. It's actually one thing that I've started thinking about, really, where I'm starting to equate cis to very similar to the identity attached to white, where part of it is it's the absence of identity, because it's kind of like the currently accepted assumed position, where my identity is the comfort of never having to think about it. And it was true kind of coming into trans spaces and interacting with trans people, where I became really aware of where that, through not thinking about it, I actually have very little understanding of gender identity itself, of like what my identity is. Where it's almost like that, if you walk into a room and there's like a pillar in the middle of the room, you've no idea what's behind that pillar, and if you just get used to that pillar being there, you end up associating what's in the way with your vision as opposed to what's behind it, when what's important is what's behind it. And it's learning to untangle that idea that being cis is a thing as opposed to it just being like the norm, which is kind of why it's really funny to watch transphobes lose their fucking mind thinking cis is a slur. No, it's just it's a descriptive title. It just means to identify what you're identifying with. And where this really comes to a fore, and I'd encourage any cis person to actually like this is something that's important to engage with. It's you ironically actually did exactly what you're doing at the very beginning, where it's cis people listen to trans people discussing dead names because it's something we will never understand in that context. I have a very close similarity to it because I happen to have like a little bit of a cultural ideal about names. I hate that parents name children. That just bugs me because it feels possessive. I like the idea of cultures where as people mature, they name themselves. That's just something I like, where that's kind of the closest thing to understanding it that I can understand. But it's even in that, it's understanding that sometimes your identity can just be a giant question mark. And it's learning to identify that you need to learn more about yourself. That was the beginning of me understanding cis.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Alex, you go.
Okay, so I mean, there. I mean, so much that
I've always liked the idea of people naming themselves at points in their lives.
Yeah. I mean, it is a good cultural concept, and I get the impression that a lot of cultural concepts need to change, because, well, I mean, a lot of cultural concepts aren't good for the general person. They're good for a nation or a group to be powerful. One of the questions, and it relates to identity in that, one of the things I've been obsessed with trying to figure out how to get to ask people is, why is it good to be strong? Why is it bad to be weak? It's something I stole from the anime Code Geass, but I think it's good questions to ask because they're like, I don't know. It just seems like it's important to ask questions about assumptions like that because a lot of it relates to, because there isn't any there shouldn't be any importance to be whether you're strong or weak. And honestly, even the describing stuff as strong or weak usually relates to specific circumstance. Like people can be good at one thing and bad at another. But like even if they're bad at everything, that shouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. That's just the person living. And the strength of people seems to relate to the strength of nations in terms of stuff, and I think part of it is I might just want to try to see if I can help people ask those questions with relation to the obsession with nationalities over people.
It's slightly separate topic, but that is one that I could go into in detail. Being Irish, like that's a huge part of the resistance movement, resisting British imperialism.
I live, as everybody knows, I live within a couple of minutes of Canada, so I've told this story on a number of occasions. I was driving along the river's edge, and I looked across, and there was someone driving the exact same car because that road winds, they were driving. It was relatively the same speed, and we just went across from each other for miles, and it was a bizarre. It was a bizarre thinking about national identity, that there is someone in another country that I can see doing the exact same thing I'm doing. Probably not going to the reservation for cigarettes, but
I mean, in terms of that, obviously there are a lot of identities that can be made, and the question I often have is the importance of identities for finding someone else if you're different. Because I didn't know about like asexuality or the asexuality spectrum until like a couple of years ago. Which, whatever, I was doing a lot of soul searching after getting hit by a car. Well, it's just one of those things where, you know, if being sexually attracted to, you know, whomever is a thing, well, not completely whomever, but like where gender isn't a thing, like none of the physical traits matter, it's just sexually attracted to the person. And if only being sexually attracted to one gender is a thing, then arguably not being sexually, you should be able to take bits of those two and you know, not be sexually attracted to any gender. And so, but like, so much of stuff is assumed. Like, so much identity is thrust upon you. I get the impression. I mean, gender was obviously thrust upon me, and same with assuming I had more interest in sexual and romantic or romantic encounters. That was an assumption that was made. Funny enough, my dad thought I was gay for like a while because I didn't date anyone in high school, because I didn't have a lot of interest in that. So it's just one of those things where, this is why I think atypical identities sometimes are helpful to not feel alone. But at the same time, there's there are good and bad. There seem to be good and bad things to identity, and I can't quite place where the line is in terms of what makes some identities beneficial or more beneficial than others. Or maybe I'm starting to overthink things.
I think so. I want to touch on one thing that Zahn Zee said that I thought was pretty important about the dead names, and to repeat a line from John Oliver. One day, David Howell woke up and decided everybody should call me the Edge from now on, and everybody called him the Edge from then on. And we have all this trouble with being dead named, or that it's not your real name or your parents. I have a trans kid, and my trans kid came out first, just for the record. And I mentioned, and my wife does not like the term dead name at all, or my ex-wife. My ex-wife does not like the term dead name at all. That's disrespectful to the parents. I said, well, first of all, I'm the one who named the kid. So
it feels like that ties directly into what I was saying with that. It's the idea of naming a child just feels so possessive in that regard. Where I think one thing sometimes parents, and I have no children, so this just might be something that I don't understand because I'm not a parent, but I do find that a lot of parents, a lot of their identity gets wrapped up in being a parent, where when their child then becomes an independent person, you feel like you've lost something. And this might actually tie into kind of like the negative aspects of identity that Alexandria was talking about, of how like being the identity of parent can really unite you, but then in that situation it causes you discomfort knowing that things have changed, when kind of like to keep with the ship of Theseus situation, it really hasn't. Like nothing has actually changed. It's just like fundamentally rearranged itself. Where like your little child who was your everything is now its own everything, and you have to kind of be okay with that.
I've always considered myself temporary caretaker anyway, but which, and other people have much stronger, things. I'm temporary caretaker. I will be there for him, forever, but that's fine. And we talk a lot. Just we're talking as adults now in a different way than we used to talk, because he just turned 18. And you're totally straight on that. Sorry, I don't mean to imply that you're totally straight on anything. All right. But it's been a strange. It is a transition also. Technically this kid is grown up, and we had a long talk about he really wants to move out and when that's going to happen. I'm thinking, I'm still living with my ex-wife, so good luck on you. But yeah, and I'm like, okay, let's figure out how to make that happen. It'll be fine. But remember, you can always come home. It's not a possessive thing. It's this is a shelter. It's always been a temporary caretaker situation, and it's a little different from my ex-wife. My ex-wife is very more heavy-handed in the caretaker, and this is my child, nobody come near him type situation, which has been actually a source of friction between us for a long time. And I do have to say one thing. If I mentioned earlier, I'm XX. Fertile XX male is unusual, but it's not unheard of. And I have 2 children. They are 19 years apart, and we tried with both of them. So,
there's even been fertile XY females.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Like sex isn't simple.
Yeah. Biological sex is not a simple thing.
Well, I mean,
there's that.
Well, okay, I can break it down to the simple form. The default for a lot of people is all the female primary and secondary sexual characteristics, and then there was a band-aid put on for the male primary and secondary sexual characteristics, and you have a lot of the genetics for either. So
yeah.
I suppose that just makes it complex.
But biological gender is an entirely separate issue from gender identity. That's a whole show.
Well, biological sex. Gender is not a biological concept. A mistake many gender critical folk make.
One of the oddities is that the chances of a fertile XX male having children is very small, or even being somewhat fertile. The chances of an XX male having a trans child is extremely high.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, basically, you're suggesting that the gender assigned at birth is not very accurate when you come up with atypical chromosomes. Weird how that works.
Yep. Just a smidge.
It's that ties into one of the things that Sex and gender always felt like different things to me growing up, and like to a degree, like a few years ago when I found out that people were saying sex and gender are the same thing, I honestly thought that they were joking. Like it just felt so obvious to me that they're not the same thing that it actually took me a while to realize that they were just bigots. They weren't messing. It just felt so obvious to me. The example that I always get heard is, I'm yet to find the XX chromosome in a dress, and I can't find XY chromosomes in suits and ties. I think it's I might have mixed them up actually.
You got it.
This the school of thought that I fall into, I think it's bell hooks, where it's the idea that gender is a performance, where, as she said it like that, like, I am not born a woman, I became a woman by living as a woman. That's the way that I often think about it, where that it comes down to social expectations. Like none of that has anything got to do with kind of like the physical body that you inhabit. It can often come down to, like we mentioned, the identities that you kind of develop and cultivate and have within your soul. And this is where it comes down to that sometimes I get really annoyed when people hold that identities need to kind of be projected outwards. And what I mean by that is like that, like, I can determine your gender. And that's what I mean by like projecting something outwards. It exists purely within yourself, where that it's why we say like assigned at birth and kind of like that, like the difference between cis and trans is the identification with yourself. Gender to me is purely exists within the mind of the subject. It doesn't exist outside of that person. And I think that's where it gets very interesting into the concept of like identities and when they become group identities, because I'm trying to figure out how long I can go for, because I need to go to the bathroom, but there's somebody in there at the moment. One of the things that I found amusing is that one thing that I'm actually hearing in a lot of the conversation so far is, it reminds me of the idea that I heard from Buddhists of the concept of like the role of persona in terms of how we negotiate with society itself. Where one of the things that I learned very early is that like when you say like that I am, and then you say your name, the I part of what that is that's a part of you that you've invented for yourself, but that's not who you are. And you have to like create a person in your mind to interact with the outside world, but that's not really who you are, so to say. Where you form an ego, you form a persona to be able to interact with the outside world. Where
Yes.
identities become toxic is when you tie that ego to other people's opinions of you. Ironically, this is where embarrassment comes from. Embarrassment is when you actually see yourself from somebody else's perspective. And I think this is, I'm not in any way trained to argue where gender comes from or anything like that, but it's always occurred to me in that perspective that I noticed this a lot, where that people will get very insistent that their ego projections, like especially cis people, their ego rests upon this being simple, like I mentioned earlier, because they don't think about it, and they're directly threatened by having to think about it. And I think that's where a lot of that comes from as well.
Sure.
Well, I mean, one thing I will get back to, I want to jump down. So I've got mixed feelings about bell hooks in terms of the gender thing, but it's so, because I agree with it to some degree, because gender is ultimately a social construct. But that being said, there are physical aspects to dysphoria that bell hooks kind of insinuates that everything about being transgender will go away, but like the physical dysphoria thing, I'm pretty sure is a medical thing, based off of like it can happen to any part of the body, but with people who take HRT or go through gender confirming surgery, it happens to be around the primary or secondary sexual characteristics that is the dysphoric part. But people, there are similar conditions in terms of like people can be like, it's like not recognize their arms as a part of their body. Like that's a thing. It can happen to any part of the body.
I really wish you hadn't done that one, because there's a really simple acronym for it. When they people who don't think certain body parts are their own. And a lot of people lump the two things in together, and they're not. If you subscribe to the I'm neuropsychology, just for anybody. If you lump the two, if you subscribe to the homunculus theory, which has its problems, but it's a really easy way to conceive of this. When someone is dysphoric, it's not the simple one part or one thing that's wrong. It's like the whole homunculus is not a reflection of how you see yourself. But when you have the specific areas that you don't feel as a part of yourself, and I know, and one of the things that you're also saying when we talk about gender as social construct, we have to split. We almost need another word, because we have to split the idea of gender in two, because what we do physically. I mean, I feel there was a point at which I felt like okay, I am a woman. I am now presenting as a woman. That's fine. But part of that had to do with what you're saying, actual physical changes.
Well,
although my fake breasts are a lot bigger than my real ones.
I'm going to very quickly just jump to the bathroom. I'll be back to you in 2 seconds.
Okay. I like the ship of Theseus idea, though. I gotta say, I really hadn't thought of it in those terms before, and I'm like, you just hit on something that I really think about. It's one of those things that gets me to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Is that well? There's going to be a series of little changes that keep going into it, but then at some point, it seems that every trans person at some point feels that they've made a change, that this is a watershed moment, and that they realize that they are now, there's a discontinuity of identity, and sometimes they want to express that in their name.
Yeah.
More often than not, they want to express that in their name.
Well,
can I say the exact moment when I said, "Oh my God, I really am a woman. This is what happened. This has actually happened." It was about 40 minutes ago, and I kid you not. As I was sitting down after we all took our bathroom break. I saw I saw this, and I went, "Holy shit, that's me, isn't it?"
Reasons for me to try to deal with breast augmentation surgery, because
these are slightly less than B, and I have no bra on, so
yeah, well, mine are smaller, so
it's okay. But honestly, it really never struck me before. As much as I pay attention to my breast growth, it really just bang. It was like something weird. Maybe because it was on my mind.
Yeah, maybe because of the topic. No,
I mean that's a valid.
Yeah, I just don't want to. Obviously, I don't want. How should I put? There's likely a lot of reasons, and this is probably like this might have been the straw. Like certain aspects of this might have been the straw, but like there was like a bunch of other stuff. It's just one of those things where it's I hate the idea. Oh, where did Perfict go?
I don't know.
Perfect.
It's okay. He'll be
Perfict
back.
Disappeared. I don't know what happened.
He will be back. He sometimes loses the connection. His Wi-Fi is pretty bad.
Yeah, like super bad. Zoom is the only thing we've gotten to work halfway decently for. Well, no, actually, it works pretty well for Perfict.
Yeah.
I've
So-
had awful troubles with Discord and just my internet were just completely cutting out.
We didn't talk about too much other than where we already were. So you didn't miss, you didn't. I showed my breasts, so which it was
well. Hear me out. Not in a way that would require me to edit the video, which is the important thing, because the less work I have to do, the better.
Okay, I just want to look at them for a while.
I can pull back to bell hooks and reply to what you were saying, because it's really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Because it's like I mentioned earlier that part of my background was I was studying astrophysics, and one of the things that I learned in that is the utility of a theory relies purely on its descriptive ability. They're not dogmas, they're not religions. We don't take them just because somebody said them. So if contradictions arise within the theory itself, what that does is that allows us to then kind of, it gives us a window into looking at something else. I could equate it to Newton and Einstein, actually, because Newton was brilliant at proposing a way of looking at physics, because he introduced the mathematical realm where he gave us his laws of gravitation, but his theories of light were just wrong, just completely wrong.
Yeah.
Where it took Einstein to say he was brilliant, he gave us a way of looking at the world, but this part of it was wrong and doesn't conform with our experiences. And instead of rejecting Einstein, we said, okay, we have a contradiction, let's explore the contradiction. And like I'm a leftist. Dialectics is how we perform our ideas. So we examine these contradictions, where if you could have the social construct of that performance, while at the same time having something like gender dysphoria, where even with the transition, those dysphoric elements will not disappear. We can't ignore that for the theory. We have to adopt the theory and use the theory to allow us gain access to something that more accurately describes the lived experiences of people, because ultimately that's the point of these theories. It's to help us more accurately explain what it is to be alive.
Well, yes. Although I will say naturally, because I don't want to. I never want to leave out other trans experience, and some describe things in terms of dysphoria, and I think some of that. I mean, from my personal experience, my personal views, I think it likely is one of those things where people can view the exact same thing in a different way. Like if someone, it's like if from the day I was born, someone has stood around tapping my shoulder once a second for my entire life. Now, for me personally, I might describe that as, incredibly upsetting, disturbing thing, and I just want the person to stop tapping my shoulder. Please stop tapping my goddamn shoulder. But like another person might be just like, yeah, that's whatever, and then be like, but you know what? I would really like to try, not having the shoulder tapped, and then they might be like, oh my god, not having my shoulder tapped all the time is like the best feeling ever. I am so like happy about all the aspects of everything that I notice that's different and so much more wonderful. Yeah.
And if they don't want to think about it, a lot of people go, well, people don't get their shoulders tapped. That's not a thing that happens. It hasn't happened to me.
Yeah.
And saying I'm a non-shoulder being tapped person is that's an insult, because it doesn't really happen.
Yeah. And it's like exactly what you're saying is what I'm getting at, where that we have to include the other voices to make sure that like all of the ways in which this is experienced, so that all of it is taken into account. And and this is ultimately recommended. If the theory is wrong, we throw out the theory and find a new one.
Yeah, and that's I know there's been someone that I know, I don't know if it's a gender critical person. I mean, they've been acting up recently. Or what? Because yeah, definitely with a gender critical attitudes. It's very much well, this is different from the theory, but like, let me just the theory can't possibly be wrong. You must be shit. I can't even think of what they tend to say, because like oftentimes they describe things that are not trans experiences. And so
they think we're lying or outliers to the one that gets me is when they think we're dangerous because we're trans.
well, that I think relates to their gender essentialism, where it's very much these are all traits of men, and only men can have these traits, and only women can have these traits. And to some degree, there are societal aspects that tie into that, and that's part of the what makes gender complicated. But when you start to add everything in, then it kind of dismisses people who don't fall into that. One of the really annoying things, and I know you're talking about men's rights related stuff, but so I mean, I know you mentioned how that's essentially bigotry repackaged, but like some of the aspects of them ignoring the pain of men, because a lot of the attitudes are similar to some of the aspects of men's rights activists, where things are just repackaged, because very much there's an argument that women can't rape. That is like a big gender critical thing, where they're just like, women can't rape, and it's just like all the men who get raped by women, all the trans women who get raped by other women, all the it just like discounting all of that is just so cruel and so wrong.
If I want to throw one thing in before Zahn Zee, because this is relevant to this, and I'd love your comment on it as well. I have been being called a men's rights activist lately because that's perfect. I've been being called a men. I've been being called a men's rights activist because I'm trans, and because I think that women's spaces are my spaces as well. And I'm a men's rights activist. I can't be a feminist. I was not on the lines fighting for equality during the ERA. No, I wasn't. Of course I wasn't. And things like that. These are things that never happened, and it's like a wall that they can't see through. So I'm sorry. I wanted to get your idea on that. To add that idea into, because talking about men's rights activists.
The first thing, I'm so sorry you've had that experience. From my understanding of gender critical people, the thing that always struck me as just incredibly odd is because they seem to be trying to undo the work of the feminist movement in the name of feminism. They're biological essentialists. The whole point of first and second wave feminism was untangling essentialism from biology to argue that women shouldn't be tied to their biology. So they're not feminists by any stretch of the imagination. Before I came on to chat yourselves on stream, I was talking about men's rights activism and how when done correctly, it's just called feminism. And one of the aspects that I have was that one thing that I always found odd was because this was a red flag for me when I really started thinking about it. Men's rights activists are hostile to trans men. I thought they cared about men's issues. That's an aspect where men are deeply marginalized by society, and these trans men are like shot on in so many corners and situations. So like they should be natural allies to kind of advocating for legislative rights for trans people, because one of the things that MRAs claim to really care about is addressing legislative discrimination against men. So if they're trans exclusionary, I don't think they give a shit about men. And it's in that situation where that like the MRA became a slur, but like I've said, and I was saying in stream today, they have a lot of very valid grievances. Those grievances are a direct consequence of patriarchy, and
Yeah.
when you redress the effects of patriarchy in society, we call that feminism. So MRAs, like when you do it correctly, it's called feminism. Join us. You're welcome over here.
Yeah.
You're a man. You're not allowed to be a feminist. That's what the critters are telling us.
The first wave feminists would have like slapped you in the face if you told them that they're only allowed to be a feminist because they're women. That was part of the problem. It's stop telling them what they can and can't be.
Yeah, well, gender critical stuff gets into a lot of a lot of cringy and absurd stuff when they're like the "we can always tell" is the most shoot in the foot sort of thing, because when they start calling cis women trans because that woman they happen to not like. It's just yeah.
My mom is very high femme, and she gets clocked as trans more than I do.
Yeah, shit like that happens. Like, it's almost like biological sex is complicated. There's a bunch of
very because one of the aspects as well that gender critical people, I'm used to calling them TERFs. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that. I have no idea what I'm used to calling them.
Oh yeah, fuck TERFs.
Yeah, well, I usually like try to phrase my stuff because I want to be listened to and change minds. So, but okay. I have no problem with you doing it. I'm not gonna, and I do it sometimes off air.
And I call them gender critters. I have no time.
I love that. Okay, it's like, to get spicy, I'm a leftist. I reject reactionaries. Gender criticals just sound like traditionalists to me. Read the words of the Enlightenment and start looking at individuals as being the autonomy of their own individual rights. Stop trying to pigeonhole them into boxes. Like, join us in the 21st century, please. Sorry, go
on. Perfect sound like he was trying to say something.
It always rings false when somebody is trying to argue for gender equality, except for this sort of gender.
Yeah.
And I go, that's not gender equality. You're not trying for gender equality. You're trying for gender equality for a specific gender. That's not about equality. That's a gender advocate.
Yeah. And I try to stay away from that I'm activist by nature. So yeah, I was in the lines in the feminism movement and then the anti-draft movement and a lot of stuff. But doing the marching, doing the signs, doing the petitions and shit.
Well, my dad was busy in getting himself into a mental hospital to avoid the draft.
Well, see, I was
true patriot.
One of the things one of the things I've always known about myself. My older brother died very young. The only reason I exist is to get my father out of the draft. This is something I've known all my life. So it's I don't care. I don't. I think okay,
no,
good. I think okay, good. He got out of the draft.
Worked out for both of us.
Yeah, it worked out for both of us. I came out to him before he died, and he's the first person I came out to. So, I got lost in this thing somewhere. But to be told that I'm not that none of this happened is one of the difficulties because I took beatings for trying to be on the front line, for being on the lines with the picket. I've I've been beat to shit for a whole bunch of activism, and I don't want to be told that not only didn't it happen, but I am not allowed to be a feminist now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's gotta sting.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. That's just a sucky thing to have to hear.
yeah, it's very recent, which is why it's on my mind that someone who really went after me with that argument, and I'm like,
Well, yeah, and I mean that also fits into gaslighting. When someone starts to try to make you question what you really did, how you really feel, stuff like that, and then repeat it over and over. It's just it's shitty behavior, and I try to avoid telling people how they feel. Although I do mess up once or twice. I did mess up on Sunday, but to be fair, it was an understandable circumstance. Because I did tell Ileani how she felt.
yes.
I did apologize for that, right? Or I tried to redress that, but
you did a fine job. It's all right.
because, well, yeah, she seemed very much angrier than she was willing to admit.
You think?
At first, she's like, "I'm calm," and I was just like, "No, you're not." And she's like, "Fair," basically. But I didn't mean to tell her. But like that's something that in general I try not to do because there are consequences, and I think this is pretty close to the time. I accidentally well, I didn't completely accidentally, but I started recording earlier. This is around the time when things are allowed to be a bit more freeform, and you can stick as much to the topic as you want, or we can just talk about stuff. We usually have call-ins around this time too, but obviously because this is a pre-record, there aren't going to be any call-ins. But yeah, just mentioning ahead of time or on time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Long time panel member, first time caller.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, I didn't actually have anything. Sometimes I blurt stuff out and then I don't actually have anything to say, and yeah, go on.
In terms of freeform, I didn't want to bring this in because it's kind of one layer above, but to me this is very related. Where there is an Italian philosopher called Antonio Gramsci who came with a concept called hegemony, which to me is kind of like the root layer of a lot of what we're talking about, where it's the kind of like the implicit contracts that we're told we consent to without ever being aware of what it is we're consenting to. One of those actually is kind of like the insistence and inference of kind of like the gender critical mode of like cisgender being like the default. Like that's a hegemonic position where we like I was raised cis, I was never asked, and I was never kind of like encouraged to explore that idea. So it's something that I consented to in terms of it just being my upbringing, where this ties into I'd say ideology. It actually does tie into ideology, but it ties into identity in a lot of situations, because a lot of who we think we are, we've never investigated or discussed, and a lot of what writings and theories within marginalized spaces is actually starting to investigate the kind of like identities that don't fit with hegemony. And like this is one of like, to me, this is like one of the great things about LGBT spaces, is because it's serving an absolute hammer blow to capitalism, because trans people are really bad for capitalism.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really bad. because there's a concept there's another philosopher called Louis Althusser who came with a concept of ideology and what's called the ideological set apparatuses. Basically what they are is they're the ways in which kind of like ideologies reproduce themselves in society. One of the ways that ideology reproduces itself is in families, and families are kind of like uniquely cultivated over the space of like centuries to just reproduce people and to just make more and more people. This is why LGBT people get pushed out of society, because they're ineffective at making more workers for capitalism, which is why they want to try push you out of spaces. And it's why I'm deeply in support of LGBT people, because one, you shouldn't be pushed out of spaces, and two, if capitalism identifies an enemy, you're my friends. It's literally that simple. Like if the worst thing that has happened to the world right now identifies you as a problem, that means you're pretty damn fucking based, and you're part of the solution to ending this damn thing. That's part of where it comes from, because one of the things that gender kind of identity does is it's finally given people an opportunity to be able to actually address that concept of hegemony in terms of gender identity, to finally start asking themselves, like how many people grew up thinking they were what they were told they were, only to like the moment somebody even just said to them like, are you sure? Suddenly that opens so many doors, and like I think that's beautiful personally, because I love the complexity of the human condition, and like, that ties into that concept of hegemony and ideology, where so much of this, it's so much deeper in society, and it's understanding that it's, I think I mentioned it earlier, where that we are individuals, and it's important to understand the individual layer, but we're all component parts of societies. And ideology and hegemony exists at the societal level. So it's understanding that like societies are going to try to kind of conform us into situations. We can also then kind of use those to bond with each other, and through doing that, learn to love each other.
One of the reasons I tell the story about the guy with it was a green Ford Taurus, they're not paying me. I tell the story of the person across the river. It's one of those things, because I don't believe in nationalism. I don't accept it, because my accident of birth, where I was born in Southampton, New York, which right away is an identity all to itself. I don't know how much you know about it outside of the U.S., but they do here, and I don't accept any of this. It's not. No, I'm one of those kids who never learned to stop saying no, because too much was wrong, and too many systems were hurting people, and still are.
I mean, arguably to some degree that's all throughout America, because people associate more with their state than they do their country. Not to say that there are people who identify who put in overly large importance on country. One might say some people put country above people, as in some so as if it was some like and most of them, I don't think they put that much thought into that. Some people have. Those are usually the fascists, or at the very least nationalists of some sort. I know I had a conversation and I was just like, what do you consider more important, like nationalities and people? And they were just like, basically saying that it's stupid to put individuals as any importance. What's important is the nation type thing, and it's just like, well then.
Just to give you an idea of where we stand here. Perfict is the least far left of us, and he's pretty far left.
Well, I think it's hard to at some point having conversations with regard to, well, for one thing, just everything LGBT has an increased chance of being left of center. I mean, I don't know who's further left between me and Christy, because I don't know. I don't always think about left-leaning labels, and I'm not sure if I'm more in favor of anarchism or not. So,
yeah, it's one of the things that ZahnZee just said. I mean, that you just said, ZahnZee. Idea which I hadn't thought about before, is the entirety of the way we look at gender and sexuality is something that most people don't question, and the mere act of questioning it makes you question other things as well.
Yeah. And also being like fucked over in the poorest people in the country also may factor into saying fuck capitalism. Unless you find a way to be a rich bitch. I'm looking at you, Blair White.
Some of the rejection goes both ways, though, because the number of people who I've talked with where it is centered around that they went to college, and they said they'd always been, they were aware that people could make these sorts of decisions, but they never seen themselves as being able to make those sorts of decisions. But then they were away from everybody who had all their ties to their life previous. They were, that where everybody knows them and everybody knows them in a certain way, and they can make a decision now about who they are.
Online spaces did that for me.
Yeah.
My parents were. So I grew up with socialist parents. So like, my parents were pretty cool about me getting to understand myself better. A lot of my fears came from society in general, and so
Parents
it's easy.
Golf clap.
Yeah, no, they're really. I mean, they gendered me properly. They were there for my name change. They were there at the legal thing. They've been supportive and helpful. I mean, not always the best help, but like, they didn't reinforce super strong gender norms. Like, what they let us do self-discovery, I think, a lot more than the average parent, and they're also kind of for LGBT rights my entire life. Sorry, I am humble bragging about my parents now. I forgot where I was going there. There was something.
So you may not have faced that revelatory moment where you go, I can decide.
Oh, yes. I didn't really face that because I always felt like I could decide to some degree. And sometimes that involved deciding to rebel against my parents and go down the libertarian route for a bit.
Yeah, we all did that one. Online space. Christy was created in online spaces long before I came out. Who I was on online spaces is who I am. Who I was in real life was a performance, was a costume I put on. And a lot of people are like, well, you haven't changed at all. I'm like, yeah, but you never met Christopher, or Topher, which I used to be called. You've never met him. He's not a thing. This is just he was a costume that I didn't like. It was ill-fitting and itched a lot.
Yeah, and to some degree, I did similar aspects of that, because it's hard to. I can't completely ignore society. Like I know at some point, in like 7th grade or something, was when I um, actively taught myself to not have my wrists too limp. Yeah, sounds like you did a similar thing, Christy.
Yes.
It just being myself happened to be more feminine, and some of that was just at some point recently I focused a lot more on being myself and not worrying as much about um having to perform as a specific gender. Because there's a lot of that, and there was a lot of trying to make effort to pass, and some of that deals with how I'm treated, and well, actually, mostly because of fearing being treated cruelly was the reason why I focused more on passing than having my own style for a while. The reason I shaved like the left half of my head was to have a style and not go against worrying about passing and instead focus on a style that I might like.
See, I shaved my whole head just so I wouldn't come out.
Yeah, it didn't work out too well.
Nope. 3 weeks later, I was out. So I'm sorry. We wandered your subject quite a bit.
Well, yeah, but
I like tangents.
well, yeah, this is the part where we're more free to tangent. So, tangents are good. That being said, a lot of things.
I'll co-sign that.
A lot of things. Just when talking about things, it just seems really difficult to actually start getting people to think about gender or identity or the overimportance of nationalism or any of those things, because it's, I don't know, it's just so I know there's a cognitive behavioral brain process in terms of like there's like the quick and easy brain process that you can do where you can just be like go down a handful of emotion fueled set paths that you're likely to go on. It's part of the reason conspiracy theories happen.
Yeah.
Heuristic. The word you're looking for is heuristic.
Possibly. Well, I mean, I was thinking about fuck. ATF.
Well, I'm always thinking about that.
ATF.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
But like average something. I totally forgot the breakdown. But yeah, like and part of what I've struggled to try to do as just like a general thought process is I really want to try to, if I can stop people, if I can get people to think, chances are people will start going for what's actually best for them.
Yeah.
Because the important thing about exactly what you're saying is that that gut reaction to something serves an incredibly important evolutionary role, and that you're in a field somewhere, like lion jumps out. If you think about whether or not it's a threat, you're dead. You just get that impulse, I'm afraid, and you run the fuck away. The whole point of that impulse reaction is to avoid thinking. And 9 times out of 10 it's a wrong impulse, but
right.
Does it matter if you have the wrong thought about the lion? You ran away, you survived. It's important to understand that gut reaction, ignore it if it's a thinking thing you're trying to do. The whole point of that initial thought you got is to spur action, but if you're in an environment where action isn't required, then ignore it. Just completely ignore it.
Yeah.
I've long said there's no such thing as common sense. And
oh yeah, no, common sense is bullshit.
Yeah.
Common sense is hegemony.
Yeah.
Yep.
No argument there.
It's the rustle in the trees as a tiger, as you were.
Yeah.
But that's an important one, just exactly like you mentioned, where that we have those kind of like gut visceral reactions to things, which are purely designed as self-defense mechanisms, where if you have to run away from something, and part of what triggers that is just if something is unfamiliar to us. So we've very unfortunately kind of linked in our heads unfamiliar with fear response, and we're now dealing with that in society where, like I was mentioning, the whole point of this is an action response. But when you're confronted with something that you're unfamiliar with in a non-threatening environment, you don't need to act, you just need to think. So ignore that process and instead just start thinking about it. It reminds me of I recently posted something the other day where I was like, whenever people tell me that like ACAB is bad optics or rhetoric, I'm kind of like, well, it's not a rhetorical or an optics argument. It's a response to oppression. So I don't really care if it's bad optics or, bad rhetoric. And I think kind of like the liberal reaction to ACAB is more about having their sensibilities threatened because they now have to think about the oppression they're facing, and they'd rather not think about it.
Yes.
Well, I've got a couple things to say about that. First, I think, in terms of talking about things, so I did a whole breakdown for a video that I have not produced yet. I've gotten too busy about other stuff, but I tried to break things down. Hopefully it'll be out before this is out, because this is out in June 28th. So if I can get out before then, everything's fine. So I tried to break things down in terms of chess pieces, in terms of the way people can talk about things. And because you can have different focuses. You can have... and I'm sure I've heard you mention certain aspects of this. I learn a lot from your channel, and those would be the bishops in that argument, the education on possible things of what to do and various aspects of actually learning about things. There's changing minds. There's oh no, I've forgotten some of them. There's the agitators, which were the rooks, and the knights were sort of the diplomats and community organizers, and then the queen, the kings are like everyone, the people who actually listen to you, the people who you affect and who affect you, because they're the most important, and the most ignored in some ways, and
the most vulnerable.
Yeah, and Queen is the people trying to change minds, because you have to use bits of agitation, bits of education, bits of diplomacy, and just like a lot of things. That's the hardest piece, and it does like the most stuff, and because my goal is to actually change minds. I'm a pawn trying to become a queen, essentially. It is
Nice way of looking at it.
Yeah, and I think breakdowns are important for people to help understand things. I think in a lot of socialist literature, it would be the propagandist. It would be the person trying to change minds. Although I wouldn't use that term because it's bad optics, and people will knee jerk to, and knee jerking doesn't help for changing minds.
Yeah.
The other thing. The other thing is Zavaris, who's one of my roommates, he made a great point about the all cops are bastards, because it's like, even if it's like 10% of cops are bad people, that's like, a million cops or whatever, and chances are some of the cops who aren't like the meanest have looked away, while the bad cops, and that puts them in the same sort of a similar sort of position where it's just like, well, that cop let the other cop kill that person and just watched. And some of it is culture. Oh, poor Perfict keeps disappearing. Perfict must be having a bad internet day. But
it's sorry, go on.
Oh, yeah. So like, it's one of those things where, it's not simply because someone's actively cruel. Like, people aren't racist. Or people seem to break things down on in terms of extremes. Like, people who are racist aren't the people aren't just the people who are lynching black people. It's, there's a lot of other factors into racism that help aid the people who are largely cops actually shooting black people and making excuses to, which sorry, I'm randomly thinking about another interesting argument, because like both with police officers and military personnel, it's I mean, the people who actually think about it are going into something knowing that they will murder someone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that this speaks to a degree of kind of like just a fundamental difference in disposition that we as leftists have to your average liberal, where that when I think of the word cop, a cop isn't a person, a cop is a position. It's a position within the state structure.
Yeah.
What makes a cop is not the flesh and blood person. It's the helmet, it's the badge, it's the gun. If a cop takes off their uniform, they're not a cop anymore. They're now a human being. So when I say all cops are bastards and people say that, well, there are some good cops, I'm like, you've fundamentally mixed up the point of what I'm saying. It's kind of like saying some tanks are good people when they mean the person driving the tank.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely relate to it on that level. There are I have some problems with it on the more esoteric level, but I like the way you put it, and I'll go with that, because
No problem.
That's what I feel.
I mean, similar with the other stuff I mentioned, I probably will avoid all cops are bastards because I don't want someone to knee jerk to not listening to me, because that's another good way. This is why I'm extra careful with how I say things, because I with a lot of things there are, and it's not about, so there are two reasons people can pay extra attention to how they say things. There's the trying to appease people, and then there's trying to actively if there's an active reason for trying to watch what you're saying, whether to be like, I don't want to hurt a bunch of people by what I say, so I'm going to pay attention to what I say, or like, I like, not everyone's goal is to change minds, and that's where all cops are bastards are. It's a really good phrase for agitation, and reminding of people all the horrible things that cops do. I'm just reminded of it. I mean, it was a quote attributed to Will Smith. I don't know if it's actually Will Smith quote, but it was the racism, something about the racism having not changed much. People just have cameras now. Like, people are just,
yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
yeah. Like, this shit was happening forever. I've heard stories about, the awfulness of Minneapolis cops. Sorry, I'm from Minnesota. So Minneapolis has always been a terrible place for cops. I remember a St. Paul police officer talked about it, because he worked in Minneapolis one day or whatever, and it was the thing where he was just gonna pull over like a couple black people for like a minor violation, like a minor license violation, and they went full defensive, like, you know, ready to be arrested type thing, and that just like spoke worlds of just how bad Minneapolis is.
Yeah.
Because that shouldn't be the instinctive reaction.
I think one of the so here when I said I had problems with it and more esoteric, I'll actually explain, because it's I joined the Coast Guard briefly, and as you all know, I was kicked out after 2 days because they knew I was bi and they didn't, and it was a thing.
Well, I mean, Zahn Zee doesn't know every aspect of your life. Me and Perfict. Well, Perfict, who is having internet trouble.
Yeah, he knows this story, but
yeah.
Why I wanted to join the Coast Guard is not because I wanted to join the military, and I didn't realize it was drug intervention and that kind of thing. I live on Lake Erie and the Niagara River, in Buffalo, you know. And I wanted to save people because a lot of people drown there thinking they can swim it, because you can't. I wanted to be in the position of saving people, and I think a lot of police officers go into the job under that idea, and a lot of the culture shapes who they are, and and that's another identity question. But the blue wall and all that is a thing, and I don't. So I think people go in with the noble. Some people go in with the noblest of intentions and get caught in the culture, and I don't know what would have happened to me if I had stayed in the Coast Guard, or not slept with the captain.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, that goes into another interesting aspect of identity, which is how much are you using identity should be, in my mind, should be used to describe yourself, but sometimes people overinflate importance, and that becomes, they consider it like a part of themselves, and that's how they should act, is the identity. So people try to conform to what they believe the identity is, to some degree. Yeah, and which doesn't help things.
From the story you told me about, like, why you would have wanted to go into the Coast Guard and why people would have wanted to go into police, I think that actually ends up being an argument in favor of ACAB in terms of the disposition for where you come from it, because it's what they want, and by they I mean the ruling classes, in like state actors within government who are controlling societies. What they want is for you to view the institution as being, this is what we must do, whereas what I would say to you is, everything you've described is a beautifully noble thing and will be required in society. Like if we have a revolution tomorrow and we have an anarchist society that has no states whatsoever, we will still need groups of people who have a disposition towards wanting to save people. And isn't it disgusting that the state manipulated you into becoming a repressive arm to violently repress society? And how they did that was by saying, hey, do you want to help people? Yeah, you can do that if you kill a few people as well, by the way, on the downside, because they're smuggling drugs. But that's just the cost of you wanting to help people. And isn't it disgusting how the state did that to that vocation? We shouldn't be okay with that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree, and that's why I'm saying I don't know what would have happened had I been able to stay in.
Yeah. But what I'll also say is I completely 100% understand how saying ACAB can make somebody in that position who they just wanted to help their neighborhood. I can understand how that person gets completely thrown under the bus. And it's important that we're able to actually reach out to people and say, to provide them alternatives as well, like, because there's a lot of police officers who once they realize what they're a part of, they have to get out. And then it's providing them with a safety net to be able to be unemployed, to find new employment.
Sure.
We need to give people the opportunity of being able to actually withdraw from that institution once they realize that they're being manipulated. It's 11 o'clock my time, so I'm just going to have to start being more quiet now.
Okay. I think a lot of people in a lot of the things that are considered helping people don't ever look at the downsides, and
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to talk for myself, because I didn't look at the downsides, and that's on me. But I mean, ministers probably do that. Some social workers that wind up hurting people for whatever reason. I mean, I'm an atheist, so priest automatically is not a occupation that helps people. But it's a very strange dichotomy, because I'm as horrible as I grew up, and I did. I think the best of people as much as humanly possible. And that's maybe it's a defense mechanism, but I don't know that, or maybe it's just the way my brain is wired. I think the best of people unless they prove otherwise.
Well, it could be a positive thing. It could be simply a result of you seeing them as people first, and not the labels that get assigned to them or that they assign themselves.
Yeah, and maybe, and I don't know. I don't know if that's relevant to what you're saying, and that's kind of what I'm trying to. That's what I'm trying to fish out a little bit, I think.
I think that's what I'm getting at in the terms that when I say police, when I say like police, I'm not talking about like the person with the badge. I'm talking about the badge, because like that person is possible of being a phenomenal person, but it's about, like I was saying a second ago, that it's individuals are parts of societies, they're parts of communities. Police is a community where you can hide within the anonymity of the badge, and that's part of how it manipulates people into kind of like being the screen behind which horrible things happen.
Yeah, and just in general, there's also there's a lack of accountability for what happens.
Yeah.
Police can get away with far too much, and that is a system that's perpetuated itself. Like, you know, and that doesn't help create a better system.
Yeah.
I think in the Watchmen TV series they had the line "Masks make you cruel," and I'm actually, masks make men cruel. Okay, I actually looked it up just to be sure I got the thing right, and I've had a lot of thoughts on this recently. I don't know if you saw the Watchmen TV series. It was quite good.
I haven't, no.
I also haven't. I've only read the graphic novel.
Well, one of the points of the entire show was masks make men cruel, and identity careers, such as police, such as priests, such as you can, because of the institution, because of the badge is a mask itself, I mean, in the TV series, and I'm sorry, I'm referencing something you didn't watch, but the but it is a take from the graphic novel. It's just spelling it out a little clearer. That the identities we adopt as an outside identity can make our what we may go in for good reasons to be cruelty, and again, they a badge would be a mask, a hassock would be a mask. I'm sorry, I'm going police and priests like constantly, but I have a song running through my head that won't go away. Police and priest is just the chorus.
Yeah, and if it helps a little bit, I understand what you mean for the most part. I get the impression that it's more well in once people get grouped up in a community, they want to preserve that community, and so it's less about them and more about the job. The job told me to do this, so that's what I did. And it creates a layer, I think, away from thinking about what you do as your own.
Yeah, dump these barrels in the wetlands, but I don't want to. But you probably this is the job you signed up for, and this is now your identity. So go throw those barrels in the wetlands.
If there are any liberals or Republicans watching, I'm going to really upset them, but this is how fascism works. It's where you export your identity onto a superstructure. It's where you lift your identity above the level of the individual onto a social level, where when you identify as a cop, which isn't it's not a person, like I said, it's a collective identity. Like there's something inherently fascistic about that concept, because like your identity is no longer you, it's a collective identity where like it's everyone around you in that regard. Like all it's missing, actually no, it's right there. It's rolling its interests into state protection, where it's collaborating with state interests to enact the interests of the ruling class. This is textbook fascism, as I understand it. And it can be really upsetting for people to realize that that's what they got lured into.
Yeah, I mean, partially because go on. Perfect.
It's a problem when your personal identity is in a large part how other people see you, and it becomes an even bigger part when it's how society sees you.
Yeah.
And that's when that is infrequently, that is seemingly part of fascism.
Sorry.
Shit, I lost my. Everyone obviously thinks they're a good person, and Christy, you go first. I can remember.
Some people are wrong about that.
Well, yeah, of course. Doug Stanhope had a bit a while ago where he said everybody's saying I don't support the war, but I support the troops. I don't support the troops. I support this guy. I support this guy. I support this guy. But I don't support the troops as a thing. I don't know them as other than what they're doing.
Yeah.
I messed. I left out a lot of the bit, but
no, I get exactly what you're saying, because like I come from a national heritage. Like I'm in the Republic of Ireland. We are traditionally and culturally neutral. So if somebody would say I don't support the war, I support the troops, I just kind of look them dead in the eye and say that's the same thing. You're actively engaging in a hostile action. It doesn't matter if it's the war or it's the same thing.
Yeah. And I can't remember. It might have been something that you mentioned in one of your videos, Zahn Zee, or maybe I heard it somewhere else. I do watch other people, but
She never watches my stuff, so it's all right.
Shit. I don't want to be called out like that. Look, there's only so much I can watch in a week, and I'm trying to deal with life stuff too, and
I'm joking. I don't care. It's fine.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just
No one in my house watches my stuff, so it's fine.
Yeah, and well, I mean, Zavaris sometimes watches my stuff. Sometimes he doesn't. There's something about when America became a country, it went halvesies on the breakdown of fascism, and it does seem to have been creeping back towards the or maybe not fascism, nationalism, the sort of, because obviously we broke from a monarchy. I don't know if a monarchy is that just nationalism? I'm struggling with terms. Like, how much of that is nationalism and how much of it is fascism?
It's imperial. It can be imperial. It was imperialism, but also I would say that slavery itself was fascism. So
it can form a component part of it. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but yeah, in the sense of it kind of, yeah, going not going completely against some of the fascist ideas, and because they stuck around, that didn't help. I don't think that's helped recently, especially.
Yeah, because it's one of the things as well, and this came as a shock to me actually when I was reading through in Hitler's Mein Kampf, he did describe the United States as kind of being like the perfect country, if only it was just more racist, because he did view its dynamic setup of its institutions geared towards like the targeted and deliberate acquisition of profit, and like deliberately forming social groups that held their identity as like you're American first and then you're a person. Like like the thing that's baffling to me is nobody finds it weird that you're literally raised with this quasi-religious ceremony of every day standing up and singing to like, you know, a prayer to the flag. Like that's a ritualistic action. That's literally one of the characteristics of that determines like something being religious in an identity. And you can soak that into fascism because it's about learning to associate your identity with the strength of the nation. Like, how many Republicans feel good about America being the best country in the world? It doesn't matter if it's true or not. That is a source of pride for them. That's part of what that is. It's learning to see yourself in the flag, in the symbolism of the idea. It's dangerous, and I'd argue the United States has always been like on the cusp of being like out and out fascism, and the only reason it hasn't was because of how entrenched democracy was, because like it's you were founded by racists, but they were libertarian racists, so they believed in that concept of democracy from the liberal enlightenment, and like that way, like if you were a constitutional monarchy, oh, you'd be a fascist superpower by now. It's like your constitution is all that stood in the way of that.
Well, yeah, and the only
of democratic powers, it's difficult for fascism to take hold, but damn it, it's trying.
Well, I mean, the only reason it even had that was due to the Farmers' Rebellion. Pushing the personal rights or whatever of people. It's like the only reason America, I think, didn't go that way, because I think it would have fallen towards fascism a lot faster if it weren't for that 1780s Farmers' Rebellion.
If just to quickly explain my reaction, because it was a little out there. I use the term "pray to a flag," and a lot of people, I get a lot of pushback on that. And You are only the other. You are the other person I've ever heard say it in those words. And I went, I feel so validated.
I mean, it's true.
Yeah.
Well, in my religion, because I was repeating a year last year, so I took some extra modules. One of the modules I took was religion and global diversity, and one of the things that it's, first of all, actually, just for anyone watching, I really want this to be understood by everyone. Religion is an incredibly problematic term because it's a Western concept that doesn't accurately describe the spiritual traditions of many indigenous South American and Asian cultures. Religion is a very Eurocentric concept. When we think religion, we think a god. That is just one type of religiosity.
Yeah.
But things that kind of categorize religion, like religion has fuck all to do with God. You could, if you were to actually strip God out of most religions, religion would still remain the same. Religions are more about kind of like the cultural practices, traditions, and rituals that a group of people communally engage in and form tradition-based activities. A lot of nationalism becomes religious, and you literally perform a ritualistic action of maintaining the sacrosanct, kind of like the sacrosanct nation of the state. Think about the way, like South Americans, think about the reverence they hold for the Virgin Mary. Americans do that for the concept of the state. It's how dare you hate America?
Well, not just that, the Constitution as well. Like,
this is where terms get convoluted. Like, I'm a Republican socialist. I will never denigrate the concept of a constitution. I think they're beautiful things.
well, no, not the concept, but like specifically the American Constitution. You know, everything written there is a holy text, which should not be altered. I know we have a bunch of rules for altering it, and I know it's been altered before.
And we've been altering it a whole lot.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be altered.
The funniest thing about that, it's the way it was originally written was expressly that this is a dynamic document that can be expressly changed.
Yeah.
So by its traditional, like if you were to hold it in the historical concept of loving the one that was written in like 1786, you should understand that it was never supposed to stay the same. That was the point of a dynamic document.
You have to understand, if you love that one, it does not love you back. It rejects the concept of.
Well, much like the Bible, it's not about what's actually written in there. It's not. I mean, I know I was born and raised Jewish, but I am aware of that Jesus said some things that were very anti-capitalist. That does not seem to be followed in America, partially due to there was someone who actively worked to tie capitalism with Christianity in America. I don't remember who. I know Mick Gay did a video on it.
He had a bizarre name, and I'm totally losing it too.
Yeah,
one of the things.
Yeah, go on.
Oh, one of the things I'm a bit of a gadfly when it comes to shit like that. When someone says how much they well, we have the Constitution, and the Constitution says this, and this, and I just say, okay, fine. What was the most recent amendment that passed that's in the Constitution? Nobody knows it.
Yeah.
I can actually tell you the most recent one of mine.
Oh.
So,
educate us.
The most recent amendment we made was to enshrine abortion as a constitutional right.
Oh yes, well, I actually knew that, which was one of the oddities, because I don't know your Constitution very well, but I do know that happened. The most recent amendment is that the Senate, that the Congress can't vote raises for their own Congress can't vote raises for any office that they hold currently. It must be at least I'm getting the wording terrible. I had it memorized before. I'm very tired.
Basically, people can't give themselves raises in Congress.
Yes. Hillary Clinton, when she became Secretary of State, actually took a pay cut from the normal Secretary of State in order, even though technically she didn't have to, but she kept it at her congressional salary. So
I'm
I
just going to pop to the back.
just
for my
throwing
2
that out
seconds.
there.
Okay, well that's fine. I will go into a quick story that I want to say anyways about the flag praying. Back in was that late middle school or ninth grade? I don't know. Someone was really a stickler for the flag thing, and people standing at attention for the flag. And he got so pissed when so few of the classmates did that because it wasn't as hard driven in the city where I grew up. So once they got like a new person in who was like super hard on for the worship of the flag of America, not everyone wanted to do it. Not everyone wanted to worship. And yeah, that definitely, yeah, he was really pissed off that so many people were sitting down. It's
Now, all the great freedoms things and so on, and I'm an atheist, and I don't like the whole ritualistic angle, and I don't like the under God thing. But the under God thing, just on another level, it breaks the scansion. It breaks the meter of that thing. It's terrible poetry,
doesn't it? Yeah. So the songwriter in me always balks at that, but
yeah.
I go, it's the one nation under God, indivisible. You're like, why are we? It doesn't work.
Yeah,
well,
one nation indivisible with
liberty and justice for all. Ta-da! And I mean, that's
beautiful.
Well,
it's very sweet. I still wouldn't pray to it. I still wouldn't do it though.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean that goes into a lot of prayer stuff, which I was never a fan of prayer. It reminded me too much of Borg speak, which is why I kept referring to it as, because a lot of people oftentimes saying the same thing in like, a semi-monotone voice. It's just, I don't know, it was always eerie to me.
Well, that's why I call the ending of my show the YouTube prayer. Like, subscribe, all that. I call it the YouTube.
Well, I mean that is, but I mean the YouTube religion is like, I mean it's got its problems. I'll admit it, that it's got some really, really awful people in charge of it.
And the algorithm is capricious.
Yeah, but no
matter what you sacrifice to it, you can't seem to get it right.
It's amazing.
But I mean, there are plenty of good worshippers for the YouTube religion.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's one of those things, because I find certain rituals, certain social rituals to be prayer-like, and in a way, for some reason, the first time I had to do the please like and subscribe, my brain went to Nam Yo Horenge Kyo, and and I've called it the prayer ever since.
The unboxing ritual, that seems to greatly appease the algorithm god.
So does the kitty playing piano. There's a wonderful Tim Minchin song about that.
But yeah, I think we're getting around the time of close.
Yeah, we are.
So, wrap things up. Does anyone have any final thoughts about gender and identity, or just any final thing you want to say before we go into promotion? like self-promotion and stuff.
Yeah, never did cover the ship of Theseus as in explain what the hell it is, in case anybody doesn't know. The idea is that a ship leaves the port of Theseus and in ancient Greece and would go around the entire Mediterranean. And at each port, some of the crew would get off and they'd replace some part of the ship. And the question is, when they've replaced the whole ship and all of the crew, and it's coming back to port in Theseus, is it still a ship of Theseus? And it's the idea of continuity of identity, that there's a continuity of identity, and it's still a ship of Theseus, a ship of that city when it's coming back, even though no part of it is the ship that left.
Yeah. And there's no right answer to it.
Beautiful question.
Well, what about you, Christy or Zahn Zee? Any final thoughts?
I'm actually, to be perfectly honest, I think for the first time ever, I think I've said all I wanted. I think I've said exactly what I wanted to say, and all of it. So,
I guess for myself, the closing thoughts I have on gender and identity would be, first of all, like, identity is a very wide-ranging idea that can cover both kind of like the individual, even then deeper than the individual. It's kind of like how you align with yourself. So like even at there's kind of like the authentic self can form an identity in itself. And then there's the idea of like you forming part of an overall kind of like system where your identity can hold a collective concept. So like identity is a very powerful idea in terms of describing how we interact with the world around us. So it's something we should be careful about how much power we give it, because of how much power it has and its ability to sway people. And just it's like that Spider-Man reference, with great power comes great responsibility, and it's not to allow it to become abused and manipulated. And that's what a lot of right-wing people try to do. They try to manipulate these identity categories through kind of social systems, so that you don't realize that you're a part of something so much bigger than yourself. So thinking about identity is very important. And then the appeal that I would give, like from my position, kind of like as a cis het male, my position on gender is that I'm actually like one of the least informed people on gender on the planet, by virtue of being a part of a group that has never had to think about it at all. So the plea that I'd say to others, cis people, would be to engage with the idea so that you can better understand yourself, and through understanding yourself, liaison and engage with trans people, because like you're at the vanguard of this concept of trying to understand the concept of identity and how it relates through all the other layers of identity. It says like, how does it relate to you? How does it relate to the idea of the authentic self? And then how does it relate to you as a community of other people? And then even just as kind of like, how does that relate to the idea of working class? And what I'd say to cis people is just listen to trans people, because we have no idea what we're talking about, because this is brand new to us. So like listen to the people who are actively investigating this. Like you have a head start on this one, so like liaison with your comrades and just learn.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of that. One last thing I'll bring up is just because I think even I've seen left-wing identities get people get too wrapped up in them and given them too much power. Like I've seen Marxist-Leninist arguments about which identity on the left is the best, and like that shouldn't be I think you mentioned before that it shouldn't be like scripture.
Yeah,
like it should just be like a description of what is, and that I think in general is what identity is. So I am Ozma in the Dark. I can be found at ozmainthedark.com. You can find my links there. Hopefully I'm finishing that one video. Perfict. Where can people find you? Are you working on anything? Is this just the rumpus room in here?
The rumpus room and here. Those are the two things that I do.
Yeah. How about you, Christy? You've mentioned a plateful.
I always have a plateful. I have my regular channel, Christy Abbey, which is dedicated to both interviewing leftist and mostly trans people, but allies as well. And that's on my regular channel, Christy Abbey. I also have a Star Trek thing that actually is happening. We've worked on it already. Yay! The and I do the bitching hour with Sophia Botha, on her channel. That's 3 days a week. I also have the Chris Abbey music, and which is live again. It's active again. And I'm doing something else. Oh, right, this thing. I'm doing this thing. My brain just farted because it's Thursday and not Sunday. So yeah, I'm also on this thing called the Fluid Voice, which I look forward to greatly every week.
Yeah, and finally, saving best for last. I mean, ideally, like to save the guests for last. What are you doing, Zahn Zee?
Lovely. My name is Zahn Zee. First of all, just thanks a million to everybody for having me on. It's been a phenomenal and very entertaining conversation. I'd recommend everybody listening to check out the back catalogue and what will have come out in the meantime between now and then. My name is Zahn Zee. I'm an Irish Republican socialist. I fall on the left wing of ideas. You can tend to find me on Twitter at Zahn_Z. You can find me on YouTube and Twitch. I stream 4 days a week on Twitch, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 7 p.m. GMT until 11 p.m. GMT. And in terms of YouTube, I tend to explore kind of more academic ideas, where I'm currently working on a video about Final Fantasy VII and ideology that hopefully I'll have made more progress when this gets out, where I'm basically analyzing the concept of Gramsci and Althusser's concept of hegemony and ideology in terms of looking at social structures, and how that game is a really good introduction for how like your ideas aren't necessarily yours and they're given to you.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, okay.
Are you going to deal with the dress?
If it's relevant.
Okay, because yeah, well, I think it was. It had to do with the social structures of the prostitution and all of that. It's
an interesting concept in terms of where I'm taking the video at the moment, because I'm doing a critique of capitalism about how the repressive state apparatuses are very obvious within the actual text itself.
Yeah.
That's where I'm kind of analyzing how the role of the state in Final Fantasy VII is very obvious in a lot of the different characters.
Oh, where,
you don't realize that you're actively a part of repressing the story. And that's what I mean, where that if that scene in Market Town is relevant to the overall text, then I might include it, but at the moment it doesn't seem relevant to the angle I'm taking with it. And there's the other side of it where I'm not sure if I'm equipped to deal with that concept. I need to read a lot more gender theory.
No, that was trust me. I watched it. My friend was playing it, and five other trans people were just cheering that whole thing. As gross as some of it was like, finally representation in video games.
Kind of, sort of.
Kind of, sort of, but there was a lot of underlying stuff, and I don't know.
Well, anyways, I hope everyone has a good time, and it was a lovely conversation, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a good one. And
thank you.
Peace.